Thousands of dollars in drones take out billions in Russian military hardware. Is Ukraine turning the tide of the war? President Trump famously said Kiev holds no cards, but does an attack on key Russian airbases prove otherwise? As powers meet in Istanbul to discuss a ceasefire, leaders from NATO's eastern flank, including Ukraine's, gather in Vilnius. How will the shifting battlefield change the tone of both meetings? I'm Sanctions, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, NATO leaders stressed today that Ukraine has the right to defend itself, and a massive drone attack deep inside Russian territory counts as self-defense. Drones, estimated to cost $4,000 each, were smuggled across the border to take out billions worth of Tupolev bombers. All this just as the major powers involved meet in Istanbul to talk peace, and while the Bucharest 9, the Nordic 5, plus Ukraine meet in Vilnius to talk defense. Here's a look.
Talks towards peace amid extraordinary attacks. It's now the new reality of the Russia-Ukraine war. On Sunday, Kyiv conducted its largest attack deep into Russian territory. Swarms of drones targeted Russian airbases in several locations, allegedly hitting 41 aircraft. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy says 34% of Russia's strategic bombers, including nuclear-capable ones, were destroyed, causing $7 billion worth of damage. Kyiv smuggled over 100 drones onto enemy soil and launched them close to their targets.
We will defend ourselves with all methods available to us, available to Ukraine, available to Ukrainians. We did not want this war for a single second. We offered the Russians a ceasefire.
On Saturday night, Moscow conducted its largest drone attack since the war began in 2022. Russian forces have also advanced deeper into Ukraine, capturing several villages in the Donetsk, Sumy and Kharkiv regions. All this just before the second round of direct talks in Istanbul between Russia and Ukraine. The first meeting failed to deliver a ceasefire. This time both sides are supposed to present their roadmaps for possible peace. Ukraine demands a full ceasefire, the return of the Ukrainian children taken to Russia, no restrictions on the country's military, and security guarantees. Russia has not made its proposal public, but it's long been opposed to Ukraine joining NATO. Moscow also wants to limit Ukraine's military capabilities and territorial concessions. While Ukrainian negotiators were discussing peace in Istanbul, President Vladimir Zelenskyy was in Vilnius to attend a summit that brings together the bloc's Eastern and Nordic members. Speaking at that summit, NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte said all members back Ukraine joining the alliance and called it an irreversible path. And Zelenskyy used the opportunity to push for more sanctions on Russia if the Istanbul talks fail.
That clearly means strong new sanctions are urgently needed from the EU's 18th package and from the United States, specifically the strongest sanctions President Trump promised. Sanctions should hit Russian energy, especially oil and tankers, price caps of course, and also Russian banks and the financial sector overall.
Meanwhile, the US appears increasingly impatient as no meaningful progress has been made. Last week, President Donald Trump expressed his frustration with his Russian counterpart.
He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
So far, the sides have talked, but the bombs have not gone silent. Any breakthrough still seems unlikely, but if Ukraine's claim that it's destroyed a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet is true, could that be a decisive catalyst for a settlement to the war?
Well, joining me now to debate where it all stands are, from Kyiv, U.S. political consultant Jason J. Smart, from London, senior visiting research fellow at the Russia Institute at King's College London, Anna Matvieva, and also from Kyiv, director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, Peter Zalmayev. Thanks all so much for being with me. Let's begin with Ukraine's drone attack. Anna, I'll start with you. Were you impressed with what was pulled off here? And do you believe the actual $7 billion figure worth of jets that can't be replaced, from what we're hearing, were destroyed?
That we don't know. That is something which will transpire. We only know the Ukrainian side of this story. Russians kind of pretty obviously being kind of fairly quiet on that front, on the amount of damage. They concentrate on the attack on the civilian bridge, which fell down, collapsed, and hit a passenger train, a regular train. A train was derailed, and another train was derailed, and civilians were killed, and children were killed. So the kind of Russian news stories about that event, which also happened last night. But what we can say that we can compare it to the Kursk incursion last year. Yeah, August 2024, again, totally unexpected. Ukraine has pulled this stunt, of course, massively embarrassing in Russia, Russian military leadership, Putin personally. For the first time, Russia has been invaded since the Second World War. But as we see now, in terms of actual battlefield progress, it has achieved very little, if not at all. Certainly significant that this attack happened right a few hours before the negotiations were about to start.
Right. I'd like to speak further about the timing of it. But first, let me ask, Jason, is this attack, 18 months in the making, from what we've heard, a one-off, or as Anna seems to think, or was it kind of indicative of how this war is going to go from here onward?
Yeah. I think it's indicative of what's going to come. I mean, the fact is that Ukraine is not in a position to be able to continue the war just doing what it's been doing for 3 years, unless it changes the dynamic of the war. That is, there must be a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is presented as something, like Anna said, in the Kursk Oblast incursion and other things like that. This attack yesterday would be something similar to that. And that's why I think that ultimately Ukraine will continue these sorts of attacks because it is the only way to change the dynamic of how the war is functioning. So I think that we can definitely expect to see more such attacks.
Okay. Let me ask Peter. And about the timing. If you'd like to comment on what Anna and Jason had to say, go ahead. But also, I wanted to ask as well, why did Kiev attack now, the day before talks were set to begin in Istanbul especially? Have they derailed these talks or given themselves perhaps a stronger hand?
Well, I think neither nor. I think that, just as Vladimir Putin is continuing his terror campaign against Ukrainian cities without necessarily any connection to any events, I mean, even though Ukrainians sometimes kind of want to interpret those as connected to some superstitious thinking on the part of the Russian leadership, I have not seen convincing evidence that that is the case. They just do what they do. They terrorize and they try to bring Ukrainians to their knees. I think we also have to give the benefit of the doubt to the Ukrainians that they had been preparing this operation for a year and a half, from what we know, and they did it when the time was most propitious, most convenient for that. So, and also to go back on what my colleagues have said, and the first guest, the first panelist, when you talk about the usefulness of these actions, the Russians will continue to say none of the actions of the Ukrainians make a difference, and that's part of the course. We're kind of used to that. That's what they will say. The Kursk operation, yes, you can say, well, it wasn't that spectacular, but what are the counterfactuals? We don't know what would have happened if we hadn't staged that operation. And we also have to give some benefit of the doubt to the Ukrainian military command, who says that the Kursk operation was successful in that it staved off the bulk of the Russian offensive plans for the Donbass. We may have had, a much less Ukrainian territory, Ukrainian control remaining in that area had we not staged that operation. So we always have to be mindful of counterfactuals. But like summing it all up, I will say that it is indeed dramatically, unprecedented operation. It will rewrite military handbooks, as a lot of the things that have already happened in this war have rewritten.
Rewrite military handbooks. Anna, why are you convinced that really is like an exaggeration? Because just at the most basic level, to have had 18 months of planning, these drones are estimated, as I said, to be about $4,000 each, and they're taking out Russian aircraft that really can't be rebuilt, from everything we've heard, to the tune of, even if it's not $7 billion, it is a big hit to the military hardware supply. Do you think that is all truly an exaggeration, that this is more or less insignificant for the Russian military at this point?
I don't think it's insignificant. I don't think that it's also something which is a game changer or a potential game changer, because that does not bring us closer to ceasefire. It does not bring us closer to peace. It does not make Russian military command more kind of warm-hearted, towards getting some kind of negotiation process in earnest. Yes, they will be replenishing this aircraft. Certainly, they will pull a story that would not have been happening if there was no intelligence cooperation with the United States. That is something which is the jury is out there. To what extent it is, certainly there are Ukrainian drones, and this is Ukrainian masterminded.
Okay.
But on the other hand, intelligence sharing is also very important, and it only comes from the West.
Okay, Peter, go ahead.
Let me just add quickly. So, both sides can be true. And what the colleague said is also correct. It may not necessarily in the near term change the dynamics on the battlefield. Putin will continue throwing meat into the meat grinder. But at the same time, once again, what this operation showed is Russia's vulnerability. This struck deep into the heartland, and not even the heartland, but way out in Siberia, 10 time zones away. And imagine the sort of logistical costs now that Russia will have to bear, having to check all these trucks throughout this 11 time zone country. Just imagine the nightmare and the paranoia that the Kremlin will have to be living with for the time being, for the in the near future and looking ahead.
And I can see you don't buy it, but Jason, I want to give everyone equal time. Jason, go ahead.
I agree with Peter, and more to that point, I think that if you seriously just look at what was attacked, this has significantly degraded Russia's ability to project strength, both in the Pacific theater as well as within the NATO territory. Why is that? Because the airplanes were not simply Tupolev, 22s and others. These were also the ones that do the refueling. This is also the A-50, which is used for command and control, as well as for radar and other things. It is for coordinating the bombers. Now, when you destroy those, there is simply not a physical capacity of Russia to longer behave as it was before. That is, Russia's entire theory of being a nuclear power with strategic strength is based on that.
Okay.
When it no longer has the ability to project strength, it ends.
Okay. Anna, I want to move it forward with you because I need to ask you about the meetings that are taking place. Today, Poland, Romania, and Lithuania said that NATO's eastern flank nations are now committed to Ukrainian membership. Just want to be clarified, does that actually kind of give more fuel now for President Putin to say, I told you so? They were planning to align against us from the very beginning to threaten Russian security. What more proof do you need? This is all moving towards the end, as Putin might insist, that I told the world were happening.
Yes, to that extent, it adds fuel to fire. And we can also say that the Ukrainian delegation from now has brought their proposal to the negotiation table, where they are saying that they reject neutrality status for Ukraine. They demand security guarantees, and that would be the only basis on which they are going to negotiate the ceasefire. Certainly, for the Russian side, it's kind of non-starter. So what we know, the run-up is not very helpful. But the bigger question, and that ties with the point about can Russia rebuild its air bomber fleet, which I think that they can and they will do in some time, and with, of course, at considerable cost. What is now more important? Give Putin a bloody nose or bring peace on Ukraine closer to reality? And that kind of rhetorics and that kind of attacks, I think, are taking a step away from peace.
Okay. Jason, go ahead.
But I think that's inherently sort of silly because the fact is that Vladimir Putin does not want peace currently, and that's the whole point of this attack: is that Russia has to be put on the back foot. Russia has to realize it has more to risk and more to lose by continuing than it does by ending this war right now. That is the purpose of the attack. That is why this is occurring. So to think that somehow this is going to slow things down is simply a joke. Putin has to understand that he has no chance of winning. He has to understand that Russia is a third-rate country. Keep in mind, their economy is smaller than Italy's. They are significantly degraded. They no longer have the ability to wage war, and they've been shown if Ukraine, a country of 22 million people in the unoccupied territories, is seriously a challenge for a country of 140 million people, I think it is a good show for the entire world to see how weak Russia really is. And it's something that's damaging the Putin regime, which is ultimately in the best interest of Ukraine.
Peter, do you agree? I mean, it's a vote of confidence for Ukraine, but do you think it overplays perhaps Ukraine's position here and actually does inspire
well, yes,
Putin?
it doesn't. It doesn't. Putin does not have to be encouraged, to escalate his attacks on Ukrainian civilians. We saw how, showing him a carrot rather than a stick, and I'm talking about Trump's peace initiative, giving him essentially everything he wanted, a no to Ukraine's NATO membership, territorial concessions, etc., still hasn't, brought him around, right? So what will? So he does not have to be encouraged to do any of this. We have to understand that, and so I think that this is a show of force for Ukraine. Also coming back to what the Trump administration and Trump himself has said before, how that Ukraine does not have any cards. Zelensky does not have any cards. That has led to a lot of memes now, kind of going viral on social networks after this spectacular attack, showing Zelensky with a bunch of aces, a bunch of cards, and he's, wearing a suit made of, Trump cards, etc. And so Zelensky also said that Ukraine will soon be able to produce 40% of its own weaponry. The Guardian just commented on it, saying that, this is a decisive demonstration that Ukraine can actually kind of go along without Trump and do what it needs to do to defend itself. So overall, with certain, drawbacks to this, obviously, and caveats, I would say this was a significant positive development for Ukraine.
Okay, I have to just come back for a second to the American on the panel, because among the other things that Trump said last week, Jason, Trump said, Putin he's gone crazy. And now we have the EU chief talking directly to Lindsey Graham. So is the U.S. perhaps on track to back Ukraine again and impose the sanctions more than anything on Russia that Zelensky so badly wants before Russia's summer offensive does major damage?
The sanctions are definitely going to happen. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the fact is the U.S. Senate already has 82 co-sponsors out of 100 senators. Keep in mind, it's a pretty close divide between Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, and yet it's got that strong, overwhelming support. So it will pass. And why that's so important is that those sanctions will put a 500% tariff on goods coming from countries that buy Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other things. And keep in mind, China and India together buy about 85% of Russian oil. Russian oil is about 38% of the national budget of Russia, of which 40% of the national budget goes to national security as well as to defense, or as the military. And so in this case, this is something that could actually crush the Russian economy. China does about 10 to 15 times more trade with the United States than it does with Russia. When you look at the United States plus Europe, it's overwhelmingly more trade China does and India does with the United States than with Russia. They simply will have a very clear decision to make. It's not worth the cheap oil to lose their entire national economy to buy cheap Russian oil.
Okay. Anna, does Moscow fear further sanctions at all? Is it any sort of deterrent?
Not to the extent that Jason has implied. We have heard the same talk, the same arguments for the last 3.5 years. Yes, there will be new sanctions, and that they will really deal a decisive blow to the Russian economy. Guess what? Last year, Russian economy grew 4.3%. The year before, it grew 3.8%. Yes, it is slowing down. It is still a growing economy. If we look at what's happening in Europe, we are not looking at that impressive growth. The sanctions are as good as the ability to enforce them. The initial sanctions, like cutting Russia from financial system, cutting it from SWIFT, were easy to enforce because this is what Americans do control. Having a trade war with lots of major economies in the world, how you are going to police it, how you're going to enforce it, it is not something very realistic, especially if we are talking about levying sanctions on the whole host of secondary countries with which United States would want to have congenial and cooperative relationships.
Okay, Jason, go ahead.
Well, I think it's very funny because this is vastly different than earlier sanctions. One, these are secondary sanctions. This is on India and China, the purchasers of Russian oil. And keep in mind, recently you saw the talks between the United States and China when Donald Trump said they were going to put a 145% tariff on this. There was urgent talks called by the Chinese who were worried that this would melt down their economy. They went to Switzerland, they had talks. Now imagine how the Chinese will react to a 500% tariff on their goods. It's simply totally unrealistic and shows, I think, a poor understanding of Chinese foreign policy to imagine that they would continue to buy the oil. We've seen in the case of India that there's been a significant reduction in the amount of oil that they've been buying from Russia over the past year, past 6 months, specifically because of Trump, and they're worried about sanctions from the United States. So already as a secondary, it is very clear this will be damaging the Russian economy, specifically about 38% of the national budget. The Russian economy is in significant decline. It has not had growth. That is false. What has actually happened is that they are calculating what their growth is based upon domestic production of armaments and things like that. Also printing money. That's not actual growth.
Okay.
That's simply inflating the numbers.
Anna, very, very quickly before I move on to Peter, go ahead.
Just so on record, IMF growth forecast for Russia is 2.5%. But ultimately, would sanctions cause a behavioral change? No, I don't think so. Yes, it will make harder for Russian people to survive, maybe, but that it will change the intention of the leadership, I don't see any sign of that.
Okay. Peter, very quickly.
Keep in mind, the IMF numbers are reported by every country. The IMF does not independently calculate those, as Dr. Matveyev knows. And so that actually sort of is a meaningless statement. And the fact is, every country reports their own numbers. And Russia just reported that they are the 4th largest economy in the world, which is so incredibly laughable. But this is the sort of nonsense that comes out of Moscow with the fake numbers that they produce.
Okay, let me just get the perspective of a Ukrainian then. I mean, Peter, are Ukrainians really holding out hope that these secondary now sanctions, if they are even imposed, will really push Russia over the edge somehow? I mean, we've seen Russia survive the worst, almost arguably, so far.
I would have to sort of split the difference between what our panelists what they're saying. I'm skeptical as to any sort of educational change. Behavior changing effects that these secondary sanctions will have on the leadership, as obsessed as it is, as obsessed as he is, Vladimir Putin, about having a knockout victory against Ukraine. Having said that, we'll take anything at this point with Donald Trump's rhetoric, as it has been, largely skewing towards Putin's position, trying to understand Putin, trying to cut him as much slack as possible. We'll take whatever we can take. But at the end of the day, we do understand that chances are slim that we'll see dramatic results from this anytime soon. I will repeat what I had in one after another of my appearances on TRT World and in this program as well, that there is something that the U.S. can do and should do. It should encourage its European allies to act in concert and finally make a decision as to what to do about the $300 billion of Russian sovereign wealth funds frozen in European bank accounts. That's a golden solution. Confiscate that amount and have it, pay for Ukrainian weaponry and for Ukraine's eventual reconstruction.
Okay. Anna, I'm going to finish with you. We only have less than 2 minutes left. Because there is, an analysis of this latest attack, the threat of these new sanctions, whether you think they'd be effective or not. The question of not just material damage to Russia's military, for example, that you don't think is overly significant, but also the psychological damage to Russians right now. If they're feeling more insecure, if this is making them dig in their heels further, those who support Putin, or finally say, you know what, this is getting too dangerous for our everyday lives, we're tired, let's find peace.
Absolutely not. We see the opposition to war dropping. We now have the 8% of people who are resolutely opposed to the war. Patriotism became the order of the day. Kursk played a very major role in that feeling. It is now kind of not socially acceptable not to be patriotic. So society is very much feeling, yes, we are under attack. And this is the West, which is doing it to us with Western blessing, and by doing it by Ukrainian hands. Rally around the flag feeling is only growing. This is the basis of new Russian identity. I'm not personally very glad to see that. I don't think that negative identity is a very good way of building an identity for a country, but that is a reality. We have to be sober. We should not have any delusion that there's some kind of democratic heart of Russia,
Okay.
Which wants to embrace the West, is somehow pulsing behind.
Okay.
Yes,
Anna,
somehow.
that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of you really so much, as always, for being with me, and thanks to our viewers as well for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.